difficult.
Yeah, one of my frustrations is that the state of Illinois is not a state that compensates for business, okay? They compensate only for land. The land is nothing compared to the business loan, nothing. And this will bankrupt me. So yeah, I am a little bit worried.
We completely understand. That's the reason multiple alternatives have to be looked at. There isn't going to be one solution that we can say is the solution at this time. This width, that width. Having worked on numerous roadway projects, you know, there may be 4 or 5 different cross-section alignments with Thomas Court, if it ever does get improved, before one final decision is made. Because we have to look at, as you mentioned, the impacts on all the businesses. And like I said, not one of those will be the best for everybody, but it has to be the best compromise for everybody in the area. And that's the best answer I think we can get for now.
I just have a quick question. With 176 basically being a 2-lane road with turn lanes and Route 59 being a 2-lane road, would it make any sense for Thomas Court to be a 3- or 4-lane road?
What we spoke about at that is that the intersection, the pavement width at Thomas and 176 is wide enough today to have a left turn lane and a right turn lane and a southbound lane. That's what I spoke about when I was met with, Carolyn, and we discussed 3 lanes. That's what we were talking about. So the pavement is there. The pavement is there today, in my opinion. So
for the turn lanes at the major intersections.
So you know, it was never. I don't envision 3 lanes all the way through to Barrington Road.
Okay.
Again, as Jeremiah stated, that would be something that we have to do an engineering study, and that's into the future. It's not been any talk about it.
So
We're just trying to.
do you think there's room right now for 3 lanes there?
I think so, but I'm not an engineer. We'll have this guy here. We'll probably start with Brad over here, and to do that analysis. But you need the 36 feet, in my opinion. They may tell me you need 48 feet. So, you know, so if you got 36 feet there today, I think so. Maybe further.
No.
So the next point we just want is kind of related to the eminent domain. Is that under Illinois law, municipalities and government bodies can only use eminent domain for the explicit public use, namely utilities, roadways, parks, schools, and community facilities. I think we talked about that earlier. Any comments on that?
Which this would be a public use roadway.
That's right. And then the third, you know, here's an east-west extension road has been planned for the redevelopment planning area. That's the TIF area since 1967. And the extension of Thomas Court to connect to Barrington Road has been included with the village's comprehensive plan since 2007, and we updated that. The fourth comment is that the current 2012 comprehensive plan, like all previous plans and updates, was developed with a public and transparent process. The transparent process includes posting of the village trustee committee meetings, plan commission and zoning board meetings, and village board meetings. At each meeting, public comment and questions may be offered and are considered. Committee meetings, plan commission meetings, and village board meetings are all posted on the village website in addition to the village bulletin board, and mailings to the newspapers are completed. Minutes of these meetings are also posted on the village website.
I have a comment there. I have an email from a client who I was talking to about the TIF district. Hi, Dr. Numbers. I looked for the TIF meeting online, and the notice is pretty well hidden. I did eventually find it, and then she gives the link. She says, for some reason, it's not listed in the Village of Wauconda meetings calendar, nor is it listed on their TIF district information page, and she gave the links for both of those. So other people might have trouble finding it. So I had to go talk to a couple different people and bring that up, that my lawyer could not even find it. I couldn't find it, so we're not that stupid. And my client, who is a school teacher, couldn't find it. So it that's another part that I put forth as transparency. If you wanted the public to know about this and come, I would hope that you would have made it easier, I think, that you would have made it easier for people to find this.
Sure. Well, Couple of thoughts. I think that Linda set the website up about as easy as we can make it for finding it, because there's a lot of information on the website.
Well, it wasn't on the meetings
Not the
calendar,
last one.
and it wasn't under the TIF district. So,
It was difficult to access. I finally just sent Linda Craniac an email asking for the link, and she sent it to me.
Is it on
She sent me the link, how to access it from the main Village of Wauconda page. I still couldn't tell you. She sent me a link directly to the TIF information where I could download all the stuff.
Now, this meeting is a special meeting that we set up. There was 2 prior meetings that we held, the public notices we sent out, where we sent registered mail to the school districts, certified mail, and went to the interested parties. Carolyn, you're one of those interested parties. We have 5 of them in total that have expressed receiving information on it. And we also sent letters to all the property owners and all the residents that live on properties that have a residential address.
yeah, you can't, I mean, obviously it'd be quite expensive to send it to, something to everyone in the city or the town to let them know
Well,
what's going on. That'd be expensive, but I think you should have made it easier for the website because a lot of the clients didn't even know about it.
yeah. All we can do is look to see what we can do to make that better, but that was an explicit request of the trustees, is that it be brought forth on the website, and I thought it was pretty easy to find, but
Well, like I said, I couldn't, my,
yeah, okay.
lawyer couldn't, my client couldn't.
The calendar, it was not on the calendar earlier today.
Okay, okay, so it didn't make the calendar. I don't know if that's the reason for that, so. Fifth point is establishing a redevelopment project area, also known as a TIF district, is a highly structured process requiring the village to pass an ordinance authorizing a feasibility study to be completed to determine whether the study area qualifies as a redevelopment project area. Thereafter, a minimum of 2 public meetings, it's actually 3 when we include the public hearing for the trustees coming up, must be held prior to each of these meetings, notices are mailed to the property owners and residents within the study area. In addition, certified mailings were sent to the taxing bodies within the study area as required under the Public Act. And to date, we've held 3 public meetings, have been held, with 2 additional public meetings scheduled for tonight's meeting and then next week's meeting. And yes, the village has invested time and money in forming the district. This is normal for any approval process. And I'd just like to elaborate on that a little bit. Before a builder or developer comes into town, or before somebody buys property, you're going to invest time and you're going to invest resources into what your project may be. So it's a normal part of the process. And this particular process is more involved because the statute requires us to do an eligibility study, many ones we do, or feasibility study. And then we have to do a redevelopment plan, and then we have to do, and in this case, because we have 10 or more residents living within our study area, we had to do a housing impact study.
Yeah.
And so those are all costs that had to be borne before we could even bring it to a public meeting.
I would expect that.
Yeah, there's no public meeting until we do those studies.
I would expect that. I wasn't saying that there was something wrong with that. I was just saying that this will be passed, that we've spent a lot of money on it already. And before the public, the public is aware of it, it's pretty much, in my estimation, a little bit of a done deal as far as that goes.
Well, again, all of the agendas, the board agendas are put on the website, they're posted on the news, they're sent to the newspapers. And before anything happened, the village trustees was on a committee of the whole meeting in early January, passing the first ordinance that authorizes spending of funds and creating the TIF of the feasibility study. And then the second item would have been at a regular board meeting where the board actually approved an ordinance authorizing it to go forth. So that was in place in January of 2013, and that was all public information that was available. So there was no hiding.
No, I'm not saying you're trying to hide it. I'm saying that it wasn't, there's a difference, I guess, in how you're interpreting A, what I said, and B, how I'm viewing how public, that information is made, or how easily it is found.
I would also add that despite the fact that they'll just spend money, I'm not gonna put words in the village board's mouth, but I would expect the village board is gonna scrutinize it like they do everything else. So it's never a done deal with a TIF district. There's a reason they take a long time to get approved. It usually takes about a year. You can do it quicker statutorily, but everybody looks at it very, very closely. Because everybody has an interest in making sure it succeeds, particularly the village board. So I guarantee at the public hearing, whatever comments come forward, the village board will listen to them and take them into account with respect to whether the plan gets approved or not, or gets modified before approval.
The last comment is that I think we already touched on it with our earlier conversation, that's that one of the first projects after the TIF district is put in place is doing this, developing a master plan that identifies and it would basically be what I call a marketing program to show developers how we would like to see them develop the project. And that again will be a public process outlining potential future development within this area. So with that, I'll open it up to you folks for any further questions, comments. We've got all the guys here that can help you answer questions.
So what's the order of things after this gets approved? Do you start the infrastructure to attract the developers, or do you get the developers to commit and then start putting the infrastructure?
In this instance, basically one of the first steps, as we've discussed, is coming up with the idea. What is this area going to be beyond what the comprehensive plan has got? More details needed. We've heard from tonight, that what's the roadway going to be? And until we know what the roadway is going to be, we can't ask the developer to pay for anything. And we can't ask the village to reimburse them for the funds from the TIF without knowing that. So that'll be one of the first things. Also, setting up the administrative process on how different projects will get funded. TIF allows for a wide variety of things. It's not just give money to developers to pay for public infrastructure. I've listed before, it can use to pay for business owners to do facade improvements. That is pretty much universal in all of them. So if a business owner in the area pays $10,000 for a facade improvement, the village can compensate them $1,000, do a matching grant of $1,000 or something. That's pretty typical. There's also targeted funding campaigns. For instance, I believe it's Lombard set up one just to get restaurants in their downtown. They would only loan out money if you were building public improvements for a building to house a restaurant, because they really wanted restaurants to develop their nightlife. It can be used very creatively, so it's not just, we're going to spend your money here, developer, come to us. It has to come up with an idea of what the village wants first, and then follow it up with what programs can be used to attract those developers.
So you're going to come up with what you want, but do you start building first, or do you get developers?
First, there's no money.
There has to be capital available for investment, and that's a very critical element to the entire process. This is not, TIF is not a banner that says free money to somebody who wants to come to Wauconda. It can't be. Capital has to be developed. It's developed in several ways. Over a period of years, the incremental revenues, which is kind of the fundamental principle of TIF, is to establish that baseline EAV and then capture the gain for purposes of incremental revenues. That's one way, but reality is going to dictate that's going to be probably a very small amount. There has to be private enterprise that's willing to invest their capital. The village board, and we haven't had this opportunity to discuss it with the board because this process has to get to a conclusion, but then, as I think Jeremiah indicated, policies have to be developed by the village, and that's only done up here, not over here. Have to be developed as to what would be considered qualifying types of projects, or redevelopment projects. Jeremiah mentioned one with Lombard. They put a priority on restaurants for downtown. Well, that might be, and there may be other things, industry, retail sales. But the board has to meet and develop that. I've seen communities that have actually set up special committees of the village board called TIF committees. This is an age of specialization, and these are sophisticated types of enterprises. So it wouldn't be unheard of, whatever you call it. You can call it Mole, Larry, and Curly, but a committee that would be specialized to deal with TIF applications, implementation of board policies, review and examination of proposed redevelopment agreements to tender to the board for final approval. So there's a process that would need to be established there to most efficiently and most effectively, be able to capture the capital that would be available, but capture that capital to be implemented consistent with the policies that will be set by the village board as to what they want to see out there, what would be attractive, what would be beneficial to the village. So the one thing though, because I can talk for quite a few minutes and I don't want to take up your valuable time, but the one thing that is going to be extremely important is the development of what we would call the TIF policies by the village board, so that staff, the frontline staff, people who have to answer the phone when somebody calls to inquire about it, has a very clear understanding of what will receive a warm reception and what would receive not so much of a warm reception. We don't want to waste anybody's time. They're terribly efficient.
And we're hoping that phone is ringing. But if, just an example, if only something on the west side got interest right away, we'd put a road over there, but the other side wouldn't be getting any infrastructure yet until somebody can.
The funds come in and can be used anywhere in the TIF district. That's the power of the TIF district, is that it concentrates those dollars that weren't there before in one area to pay for the things that are caused, to ameliorate the blighting conditions. So if you raise funds over here and that's part of the TIF district, funds go all in the same fund and can be used for infrastructure anywhere. So when you negotiate the deal with the developer who builds it, you don't have to give all the money back to that one developer for doing something. You can say, we're only going to give you 25% of the cost, which is a big inducement. And whatever EAV is left over, you're going to spend it elsewhere. That's really how the TIF works, is that you negotiate the redevelopment deals and you spread it around, trying to, with whatever policy and plans you're targeting, to address those conditions.
That's so very, very important. You cannot let a single developer or a couple of developers capture present and anticipated incremental revenues that are going to be generated by that TIF, because you do not get full growth in that TIF. So there has to be a calculation that's done, and it's kind of like what we talked about at budget last night. It's constantly done, because you want to see development come in. If they want TIF assistance, generally, that TIF assistance comes by way of the incremental revenues that are generated by that new development. It's kind of a pay your own way kind of a thing, not free money. It's kind of a pay your own way, but as Jeremiah says, the TIF policies will be such that they're not going to get 100%, because they have to be a partner with the other properties that are available in the TIF. So it'll be a percentage of that. And so a calculation is done very early on in the process of requesting TIF assistance. Before it's ever granted or agreed to, there's calculation that's done. What's your plan? What's the estimated value of your plan? We measure that against the baseline EAV, what the increment would be. We look at the current level of taxation to determine what the incremental revenue that will be generated by that new development. And then you talk about a percentage of that. Does that work for you, Mr. Developer? Because that's the policy of the village. If it doesn't, well, we've had a nice talk. Maybe there's a little more negotiation that goes on, but it all winds up eventually at a public committee meeting and a public COW meeting and a public village board meeting before anything is finalized by way of an agreement. So there's ways of doing this and doing it carefully. I mean, admittedly, there are communities that have wasted their TIFs or have gotten bound up in their TIFs because they didn't have clear policies going forward. And it's like anything else that's new. You stand kind of strong on your principles, assuming those principles have been properly developed and are adequate. You stand strong on them, and yeah, maybe the first indicators can't be accepted or are acceptable. You wait for the right one. But once you can time that pump, that's where you'll see some success in the TIF. But it all involves private capital investment initially. There has to be private capital available to invest in it before they can see getting something back. There can be some help along the way. TIF has that mechanism. That's the value of TIF. But it's not free money that just is given away to somebody to see if their business plan and their development plan is going to work. It just cannot work that way.
I'll also add, that process that ends at the village board doesn't end at the village board. Every year, every taxing district gets an audited statement, and they have a meeting to audit every dollar spent on the TIF. And if they object to it, they have legal standing to try to overthrow the TIF for it being used illegally. Rudy, if you...
We're not going to let them do it illegally.
As the
So
village
it'll be a
attorney,
proper exercise,
as
but
the
they're
village-
not going to do it illegally.
as the village attorney, Rudy has to write a letter certifying that nothing illegally happened. So yet, it's
My
constant.
insurance is on the line on
It's
that one.
constantly audited. It's no short task, so.
I've got a couple of questions and a couple of concerns. I guess the first thing stemmed from our discussion over the Dominic's property and the fact that there seems to be some agreement that the current EAV on that is artificially inflated. If that EAV comes down as a result of just a general reassessment or the current landlord or some future landlord coming in the very near future and petitioning for reassessment, what will be used and when's the cutoff for determining the baseline for that EAV for the purpose of establishing the excess for the TIF?
The ordinance establishing.
Once the ordinance is passed, the village has X number of days to send, I believe it's 90 days to send certified copy to the county clerk. County clerk stamps it, hands it to the assessor, and the assessor sets the EAV level for the whole TIF.
So there may be some tactical advantage in waiting or maybe perhaps forcing or somehow manipulating an EAV, a reassessment of that property before we establish the TIF, because we would like that baseline to start lower.
I would say also, you want to go?
Well, we don't want to talk in terms of a gamesmanship.
I'm not talking about gamesmanship.
No, I know, but we're being recorded, so I want to be careful that
Right.
we use the right words. Strategically planning the implementation of the TIF by the establishment ordinance and that anticipated 90-day outside period is probably important. You mentioned the date, December 28th, but that's, at the end of a tax year. How the township assessor is going to move, if they're going to move from capitalized rent, and if there's no rent being paid, how he will move and when he will move from capitalization of rent to fair market value, we don't know that, but I would anticipate that as part of the process of finalizing and formalizing this TIF, that will be a very important element of consideration, that those evaluations and those key evaluation dates and the methodology. So
Does the village have standing to petition for a reassessment of that EAV? So it would have to be the landowner that would have to do that. And is it possible for the village to offer some sort of an incentive to the landowner to make a timely application once Dominic's goes into a condition of default on that property? Is there anything that we can do within the confines, obviously, of proper procedure to encourage and/or expedite that reassessment process?
I will just
Go ahead.
give this caveat that the village isn't acting alone when forming this TIF. That the base EAV remains the same for all the taxing districts. So it's somewhat incumbent on the village to proceed in a normal and routine manner, so it does not look like it's trying to take away money from the taxing districts. Because whatever the base EAV is, they would lose out on any decrease before that.
Right.
So,
But also if it's, I
Doesn't
mean,
affect the
if there's an understanding that it is in fact artificially inflated by virtue of the fact that someone is paying rent on property that doesn't want, and is not reflective of the fair market value for rents on that property. I'm not talking about gamesmanship, I'm talking about getting an accurate reflection of what that EAV is, so that we have an accurate baseline and not an artificially inflated baseline.
We could probably get an accurate one with the assumption that artificial rent is out, and that would be accurate for our purposes if we were looking at selling a unrented building. But the only thing that counts is what the assessor assesses it at, and assuming his evaluation method, whichever one he's chosen, is reasonably valid. That's the only one that counts. We can argue otherwise, but that's the only one that counts
No,
at the county clerk's office.
I understand, Rudy, and I guess I just would like the village to be cognizant of that number when we're looking at the timing of implementation of the ordinance. Because if there's a way to delay by a couple of months and wait for that process to go through, if in fact the landlord intends on pursuing that, we may want to let that run its course before official enactment of the ordinance.
That's a possibility. If you think about it, Tim, when we talk about this principle that is yet to be developed, but usually is developed by the village board, their policies, if we're talking about the principle of if somebody wants to come in and is seeking some kind of TIF assistance, one of the preliminary calculation is you got to show us what the incremental value will be,
right,
and the incremental revenue totals that are going to show up from that increase in incremental value. So if they're coming in with a, let's call it an artificially high baseline EAV, that's gonna narrow down the incremental EAV and the values and the revenues that can be generated by. They have no incentive to, or they probably wouldn't get approved. So there are some things that are inherent in the system of doing this that would hopefully motivate, I say hopefully because I don't know, but hopefully motivate the property owner to get that thing correct sooner rather than later.
If they intend on holding on to the property.
If they intend on holding on to
Right.
the property. But let's assume they want to sell it for redevelopment purposes to somebody else that's going to do something big there. Again, in order for it to be saleable, assuming TIF assistance might be available, then to maximize the TIF assistance that could be available.
I understand how it works. I just
Yeah,
want to
I
make
mean,
sure.
there's
I just want to make sure that the village
I understand what you're saying.
is aware
We're cognizant.
of the impacts, and that we take full advantage of whatever opportunities present themselves on that, and that we don't handcuff ourselves for future development. Just moving on real quick, I did have some basic concerns about how the eligibility criteria was analyzed for particularly the stuff on the western side, parcels 1, 2, 10, and 11. I think that if people are looking at page C48 of the eligibility study, there's a chart and a graph there. It seems to me that the criteria showing the meeting of the criteria for number 1 seemed to be rather subjective, particularly because it was predicated almost entirely on the situation that exists with the existing Dominic's lease, and which may in fact change in condition once that changes after December 28th. And it may change whether or not those eligibility criteria still exist. So I want to make sure that we pay particular attention to that in making that decision. Parcel number 2 over there right now is virtually inaccessible and will remain so without a significant alteration to Route 12. The same thing can be said to a certain extent with parcel number 11. There's a fair amount of accessibility for southbound Route 12 traffic, but otherwise not so much. And number 10, you had to kind of gerrymander number 10 in order to bring all of the 4 of the 5 criteria into play. So I'm a little bit concerned about how we brought that whole western section into the plan. Not that necessarily I'm against having a TIF applicability over there, but we really seem to be stretching things over there. And with the accessibility note, I'm concerned as to what level of cooperation we can expect to get from the state in terms of changing configurations and changing accessibility points on both 12 and 12 predominantly, but also the way it interplays with 176, and what level of discussions we may have had to date with the state on how cooperative they'll be with changing what is essentially a fairly major arterial roadway. If you could address that.
Sure. With respect to Dominic's, your concerns are noted. The eligibility study has to be done for a date certain. We can't bank on future things, we have to evaluate it on existing conditions. I've never seen the lease for Dominic's. I don't know if you've ever seen the lease for Dominic's. So
I haven't seen the lease itself.
Yeah, that's what, I don't know when it ends, don't know when it begins. We can't make any,
Well, I know when it ends.
Well, I can't make any judgment on, we can only assume it ends on the 28th. I'm not a lawyer involved with either side or a tax account or anything of that nature. So we can only make the eligibility study for date certain, and that's what has to be done by the state law. The accessibility issues you raised for those other areas, that's one of the primary reasons they're included in the TIF. There's no way to get to them. And right now, that's an issue for them to ever be developed. And one of the reasons that TIF is being designated is hopefully to find funding to provide access routes to those areas. With respect to the one you brought up, the vacant areas, the vacant criteria are some of the more nebulous of the TIF statute. It's a little hard to understand, but each one of them does qualify under the single shot requirement, which is only one blighting criteria has to be present, and that's flooding and drainage issues that need to be addressed for those areas. That's the reason they do qualify in those accounts. But it's like I said, it's the date certain thing. The village can't analyze future outcomes. It has to say, is this being blighted now? And will it be continued to be blighted in the future based on what we know as information now? You know? So but the notes on the Dominic's, yes, it's been an issue for this village for 7 years.
No, of course.
And it's going to be a continuing issue. So.
Of course. You mentioned some of the drainage, and it looks like there's an extensive amount of wetlands in parcels 2 and 11. And to what extent will that prevent or hinder development in those areas?
It can substantially, and finding ways to buffer them and or finding ways to mitigate for them to make them developable parcels. That's one of the issues, that they're being impacted by this. To work under the WDO, I have a village engineer here, and he can go at length on how you have to compensate for wetlands in Lake County. Lake County, as you may know, has probably the strongest stormwater development ordinance in the whole state.
So I mean, is it even going to be possible, given the extensive reach of wetlands in some of those areas, to come up with a realistic, profitable redevelopment of those areas?
Well, some of those areas could be used for offsetting stormwater detention elsewhere, potentially, as well as providing wetland banking for the areas that have wetlands that would be more profitable closer to the roadways. That would be more accessible. So you could do mitigation and additions there instead, and in the same watershed within just a few, within a half a mile or so.
Can there be residential development within the TIF?
Yes, there can be residential components. The primary focus of this TIF and pretty much all TIFs is commercial and industrial and revenue generating things. There's been potential for mixed use. The problem with residential, the thing going forward is any residential units that are generated, the monies have to come off, determined on certain formula in the TIF to pay the taxing districts for any school children that are generated, any library users that are generated, any impacts on the other taxing districts. So in general, TIF doesn't pay to have residential in TIF. They have been used extensively, are trying to be used for compensating for affordable housing in areas for commercial, especially for senior housing. That's where those uses that may have lesser impacts on the taxing districts. But there is a component of that potentially for mixed use. So.
And I guess circling back to the question that I didn't get heard answered is, what conversations have we had with the state regarding their willingness to change some of the basic elements of Route 12 through this area? Is the state willing to sign on with significant additional access points along 12 in that area? Or are we going to be fighting an uphill battle? I know generally the state will give you a wide latitude if you're willing to pay for it all, but that's not unlimited.
We are hoping to have conversations with the state in the near future. You know, again, as part of our comprehensive plan, there is a transportation element, and we do include within that a hope that we will be able to secure from the state access points along Route 12.
I would hope that we have those conversations before we pull the trigger on any of this, to get at least some indication as to whether the state would be amenable to changing some fairly substantial access points on Route 12.
I might answer part of that. As you know, Tim, I was on the board for 2 years. I thought, when I heard about the meeting tonight, I thought it was at least my responsibility to come tell why I was supportive of this. And much of that access to 12 is what kind of drove me as not only as a resident, but as a board member to be supportive of the TIF. I know that the previous engineer for the city, at my request, contacted IDOT just to see what we could do with the access of the viaduct and redeveloping that area. And it was almost a zero no. There's no interest in that whatsoever, which really drove my interest then in helping to pursue, once you're off of 12, creating interconnectivity both on the west and the east side, because we don't see 12 as a lot. If we get a few accesses, that's maybe the best we're going to hope for. But the interconnectivity once you get off of 12 is the only thing that's going to help us survive in creating this district from 59 to 176 through the Triangle District, not relying on 12. And if you look at 12 in general, that part of the wetlands you were just talking about is a major problem to get access there, as well as the fact that all of 12, you know, not only from my opinion, but from residents who came to me knowing that I was on board, complained about the look of 12 and what was happening on 12 and what really needed to transpire and the responsibility they were asking for the city to take over to help recreate an area that they could be proud of. So there's a lot of other things. I'm just speaking to your last question.
Yeah.
I've got some other things I could say, but I'm speaking to your last question. We know there's going to be limited access, and the interconnectivity through the TIF is something that we were striving for to help solve that problem and not rely on the state to tell us no and have no solution.
Okay. So if I understand that right, that's going to severely limit at least parcels 2 and 11 development, because we're not going to, the access point is going to be some sort of a side road dropping south off of 176 through parcels 1 and or 10, or from the south end going north from 59, which has its own problems because of the extensive wetlands and the existence of Oak Grove. Is that a
And
fair
again, that's
assessment?
fair, because you know, my thought was we can solve that as like Zurich did years ago. With there's limited access in terms of height where their grocery store was and height. Their interconnectivity is as a frontage road transportation system, not multiple cuts off at 12. They have 1 or 2 major cuts off at 12. Then they connect all of those shopping districts by what I call a frontage road, using the parking lot system as getting potential shoppers and business owners from one place to another through that, not relying on the cuts of 12. So yes, it's a frontage system, road system that would, I think, eventually have to be developed and look further at.
Okay.
Can I ask you a question? I'm really, just, Mr. Westbrook, is there any possibility, and I didn't think there was any possibility of this, and maybe that's not at all, you can't ever get 12 to grade somehow, because Mayor Bart was in my office today, and that's what he said, don't worry so much about Thomas Court. He said it's a better option to try and get 12 to be at grade more, like change the grade of 12, it'd be cheaper than a lot of these other options.
When I moved to Wauconda 25 years ago, the first question I asked myself is, why did Wauconda ever allow 12 to be elevated above the business district? And for 25 years, I've been concerned about the problem, that all of our business traffic passes by 12. You're going to see businesses north and south grow easier because they have level access. And why was only Wauconda, if you look from Fox Lake all the way to Palatine, why was only Wauconda the one that had the viaduct over? So I asked the question, and I'm not an engineer, I'm not working with IDOT, I'll never solve that problem. What we were told was that's a highly unlikely situation to be planning on. So the fiduciary responsibility that we thought was, well, let's plan around the problem, not wait 20 years. You know, to the other aspect of the TIF, you know, it was a direct question to me because I'm involved with these businesses that are involved in TIFs, so we do architecture and design. And, you know, we were concerned about spending money that we didn't have and getting in trouble with the TIF. And as Rudy explained, you know, there's communities all around us that have gotten in trouble with the TIFs. One of our responsibilities was to say, let's set this up slowly. And the question asked directly of me, how long do I think it would take that triangle to be developed, for example? I think it's 20 years, maybe 30 years. We're not doing anything fast. We're not doing anything irresponsible to the business owners or the residents or the landowners in that area that would put them in jeopardy. I sat on the board for quite a few meetings. I never heard a behind-the-scenes comment that would give me a feeling that there was something under the table, ever. The word condemnation was discussed only from the standpoint of, we're residents here, we don't do that for our fellow residents. That was the conversation about condemnation or eminent domain. Now, if it's for utilities, for roads, I can't speak to that other than that happens every day, but I know every board member looked at me and said, we don't do that. That's not our business. We don't do that for other residents. So when it comes time for the roads and utilities, that's a responsibility that, you know, it started with the previous administration, it's carried on to this administration. For the first time, I think, in the history of Wauconda, the city has taken responsibility to solve a problem that's been there a very long time. The roads there are 1920 roads. The light systems are 1920 lights. The telephone poles are about 1915. And nobody else is living with that problem other than Wauconda. And I brought the problem originally because I was bringing developers to town, and embarrassed as I was, they said, it doesn't look right. It's junky. And that was their response. And that's why we got involved as a city, took on the responsibility and said, we've got to fix a problem because we're seeing a business owner tear down $1 million building so he can have a clean piece of dirt. That was more easy responsibility for him to say, I'm willing to tear down that kind of a building because I can't keep a business in there. I bank in the triangle, I buy gas in the triangle, my family uses the veterinarian and pet hospital, and it's their favorite hospital. I mean, we've been there for a long time, but we can't keep a good restaurant in business there. They're in and out all the time. We can't keep a good store frontage. We can't keep a good shopping center there. The businesses are in and out all the time. And it's so broken up in parcels, no developer can combine all the pieces. So we have a 50-foot lot next to a 50-foot lot. We've got so many curb cuts that we can't have a contiguous parcel for a developer to come in and feel like they'll have control over the lighting and the landscaping, and it's just cut after cut after cut. And we have to solve it eventually. Somehow we have to help the community solve it, and we thought it was a responsibility, and in my belief, it is the responsibility of the board, this board, to carry that through and work through the concerns of the citizens so that it's the betterment of the entire city, but also work with the concerns of the individual owners who may have concerns. And I think that's why they called this meeting.
Just to clarify one point, I'm looking at the tax records for Dominic's. Since 2006 through 2011, it has increased from 140 about to 240 total tax dollars. Despite that increase, the whole area of the TIF district has decreased in EAV 4 out of the last 5 years. So even though you saw in a vacant building going up, you're still seeing overall decreases. So that kind of highlights kind of the level of blighting criteria that Mr. Busser was talking to us about. The older infrastructure is also bringing down the value in the area.
One last thing, if you guys can help me with the math, and it goes to that, the total EAV for 2012 is 16.8 million, give or take a little. There's an estimation of 45 million in redevelopment costs and a projected EAV increase of 40 to 50 million over the lifetime. Could you help me out with the math on that as to what those numbers mean for increased revenue to the village?
Well, in terms
Because
of just
it looks almost like a wash.
just to walk it through the process here. Basically, right now, the total EAV of the RPA, the TIF district, is 17 million. The projected by 2037 is 40 to 50, so roughly doubling it. That's a conservative estimate. Other TIFs I've seen and worked on, some of them go up as much as 10 times. That's what they try to project. And that's for developed areas, and I think that's unreasonable. For this area, we based it on currently the EAV per acre in the RPA is about 100 grand per EAV per acre. Your newer developed areas in the village, commercially and stuff, industrial, are 250 per acre about, so roughly double. So looking at redevelopment in this area, bringing it up to modern standards would roughly double what your EAV would be. At the current tax rate, the increment would be increased 23 million to 33 million, which would represent an increase in taxes of roughly 2.4 million to 3.4 million per year for all taxing districts. So the component of the district, the component at the end of for the village for property taxes is not that full component. A lot of that, the lion's share, goes to the school districts. The big component the village is banking on and hoping on by attracting commercial and industrial development is more sales tax dollars, greater employment opportunities, and the benefits that it generates. So that's where you can't quite capture that at this time. It's 23 years in the future, and we could look at different projections on it based on today's dollars, but that's the real benefit for the village. But to get everybody to go along with it, the EAV is a number we can project pretty readily and can show to the school district, who are the people that we need to benefit the most from increasing the EAV.
So, I didn't understand it, I did understand it correctly. We're talking about essentially a wash in terms of increased property taxes over the course once we're done with, once the TIF expires, and what it's gonna cost us. What we're expecting to get out of this is the increase in sales taxes, as you said, increase in employment, and the tangential increase to other values throughout the village as all of that comes up as well.
It may be a wash for the village on property taxes. I can't say for certain. I'd have to look that a little
Sure.
closer. It won't be a wash for the other taxing districts, since they get the majority to pay for their services. What's hope is the combined for the village will be not only enough to service it, but also all the extra benefits that come along with sales tax, employment opportunities, vibrancy, a location on 12 and 176.
Okay, I just wanted to,
Yeah.
I'm not great with math, I thought I had it right, I wasn't positive.
No,
Thank you.
I just, yeah. But yeah, just to say, the thing about this one and the thing when I've worked on TIFs is be conservative with these numbers. Don't overshoot your bounds, because like I said, I've seen some people say as much as 10 times for areas that are already developed. You know, you're hoping to get double, and that's a realistic, good goal to get. And so,
What's the estimate of the incremental revenues along the way during those 23 years? Because that's kind of the fuel that the village can use to help incentivize the district. And I thought, Tim, that's the question you might have, or was it within one of the questions you were asking, but certainly a question I have.
And in general, we are looking at the total incremental revenues of between 34 and 45 million for TIF funds alone.
Right.
Over the 23 years.
Right. As against 45 million in redevelopment costs, so.
Yeah, and yeah, this isn't, those monies aren't a moneymaker for anybody. They're
No,
supposed to,
right.
yeah. No,
It's not a
I was just
profit
explaining,
endeavor.
the whole idea is to get the money and then get it into eliminating the blight.
Right.
And not go
And
on to-
that was my concern, was that the incremental increases will be sufficient to fund the redevelopment. And it looks like, based on these projections, it probably is, or it's within a little bit, so that we actually will see all of the increase in sales tax and everything else will be a net positive, and we won't have to worry about having to use those to offset losses.
Subsidize it.
That's the intention.
Right, right.
The intent was not to subsidize it.
Ma'am, did you have a question?
Yeah, I did. When the TIF is discussed, how about the increased demands, like on services of the village? Water, police, fire, how, you know, there's gonna be extra people in the community, you know, if it was just industrial during a course of a day, how is that taken into consideration? Or is it?
It is in the extent that any infrastructure those public infrastructure investments can be used through TIF funds to be paid for, so the actual capital goods can be, certain administrative costs can be covered through the TIF, to administer the TIF. Part of it will be, you know, that's the goal, is hopefully we get the sales tax dollars to pay for those other service needs, and that they're not so great, and right now they're not projected to be so great, that they'll increase demands beyond what is needed. We, at the Joint Review Board, discussed extensively water and, you know, the extension of Lake Michigan water to this area and how it would not be affected by the TIF district. So it's something that is a concern, and something that the village is wary of, but the whole idea is to get the investments and the returns on it. Because if you do get the shopping center, you're gonna get the sales tax to pay for any extra costs. That's the goal.
Well, my understanding is that the Fire Protection District, and perhaps some other districts as well, can require developers coming in to offset the additional expense of providing those services, separate and apart from the property tax issues. They don't need to increase their property tax allocation for that. They can require the developer to, at the front end, cover that, just as if you had a residential area, require a subdivision developer to build out the infrastructure as part of the annexation or so forth.
And that's similar in the good old days when property was annexing and developing, you had the opportunity for an annexation agreement, and of course, pretty much the canvas was clean when you can negotiate an annexation agreement with pretty much anything that was reasonable. Similarly, these redevelopments there will be a redevelopment agreement, again, consistent with the policies that'll be implemented from the village board. It's at that moment in time where there is some assistance available to the redeveloper, but there are conditions that the village can place in the redevelopment agreement, similar to what we used to do with annexation agreements, to cover those things. If they want a little bit taller building, the fire department says we need a hook and ladder because we're not going to be able to fight a fire if we don't have one. You know, that's where that enters into the negotiating process, is during that redevelopment agreement.
There's a handful of ways under the act that you can make the districts whole. Right.
As far as water and sewer services, I mean, new customers, obviously they pay their water and sewer bills just like existing customers, so they should be paying their own way as far as cost of providing water and sewer service, and there'd also be connection fees that would be paid for by new development for water and sewer. So it's not just the sales tax, right? The user fees.
And I know, once again, you can't really answer this in any concrete way, but if you're talking about timelines, you know, nothing is settled, obviously, but maybe 20 years down the road, you're looking for the TIF district to be, you know, developed or so, you know, something along that line. Is there any way, do you have any sense or any way to tell when you're going to be looking at a certain area, because, for instance, my timetable was on year 5, which is next year, hiring an architect to draw up plans to redo the entire building, just from the ground up. That's a huge thing, and obviously, if I'm thinking that, I don't know when I'm going to be, how long I might be there, if I will be there, what's going to happen to the road, do I have any idea? Do I just put things on hold for 10 years? Do I have any kind of an idea? When will you guys be thinking about this?
Well, as stated, one of the first things is that plan. It is a plan, and so it'll have certain benchmarks and goals. As we heard from Trustee Buster, or former Trustee Buster, this is a long-term project, so to put, we can't put an exact date certain, but one of the key components, as I mentioned, is working with the property owners in things like the facade grant improvement program if the village decides to do something like that. So we're looking for ideas of you wanting to make investments in your property because that increases the increment. And that's very important. So the village doesn't want to delay you, so that's something I think at the staff level we'll want to review timelines as it gets approved to make sure we can communicate accurately what will be developed and what won't be developed and what in the time frame. Because hearing that, you know, your investment in the TIF district is a huge benefit because that's where the increment comes from. And so the village doesn't want to run anyone away because if you're making an investment like that.
So would you do, when you do this plan, is it going to be, you do parts of the plan?
The first plan is the overall plan.
Yeah.
It sets the stage. It could include different blocking out, but it'll address the major ones. Basically, looking at the roadways, let's set those. Let's look at what the alternatives for they are going to be.
So the overall plan would maybe say something like how wide a road will be, will people be able to stay there or not?
Well,
That type thing.
it'll look at the roadways, yes. We'll look at the widths. That'll be a key component because we're going to drill down into what can actually be put there in terms of the sizing and saving the properties that are there. Because the village doesn't want to impact the existing properties, but they want to get the exact roadways that drain right and everything like that. But those details will be worked out in that plan.
And is that going to be in the next year?
That's an item that hasn't been talked about yet, other than what you heard tonight from Rudy and
But it would be the next step, wouldn't it?
That's kind of the next step, but we have to figure out how we're gonna fund it. And we'll be getting into our budget cycle in January, and that's where it'll probably be talked about. And may come up as part of our strategic planning that the trustees are gonna be engaging in shortly.
I might say that the only frustration I had in the whole process is that I'm a visual person, and I was hoping for the plan immediately. And Chris was always reminding me, well, you gotta have the TIF in place to fund the planning. And I said, well, I really don't wanna wait. I wanna see the plan, and I think the downside is without the funding, it's even tougher to explain to those who are involved what the process is gonna be. So, if it could be done within a year, obviously, then it helps people understand, the process and what it would do.
My hope would be that if you have an existing business within the TIF interested in improving and or expanding, that would be taken into consideration, and I would expect that there would be assistance available once the TIF is established to help with the expansion and improvements on businesses within the TIF. That's kind of the point, right?
Yeah,
As rudimentary as it sounds, that is the point, but we have to get the board to approve an application for TIF assistance.
Right.
I mean, it's that fundamental.
Right, but
odd as this sounds, one of the things that does not qualify for TIF assistance, and the statute is very clear on this, is bricks and mortar. In other words, somebody comes in and says, I want TIF assistance to be able to build this beautiful storage facility here. We can tell that company, well, we can, there could be TIF assistance available for parking, for drainage, for roadway improvement, for sewer and water extensions. But in terms of your bricks and mortar, your steel and structure, no, that doesn't qualify under the TIF.
I never really expected it.
Yeah. No, but Again, these are things,
Yeah.
people don't know what TIF is generally, and the sooner the clarity of what can be, what qualifies can be broadcast, the less time frontline staff have to spend on, somebody that is chasing a shadow that they're never going to catch. So that's part of the process if the TIF gets established, including development of the actual application for TIF assistance, which will have some instructions and explain that. But so it is incremental in terms of the steps, and it does take a while, even though Doug Buster wanted to have that beautiful plan up front first.
I will also say you are correct. For municipalities the size of Wauconda, local dollars are the most important dollars for TIFs this size. The crowning jewel of TIFs for suburbs in Chicago is Arlington Heights, complete redevelopment of the downtown, massive everything. That's the exception. A lot of them don't do so well because they try to ignore the local dollars. And local dollars, the people are already committed here. It's instant increments, and it's something that needs to be accounted for. And it's the one that generates the snowball effect. And then the staff, we've advised them that that's the most important thing.
I guess just in the interest of transparency, once the plan is developed, as far as which areas are going to develop first, that's really going to be market driven by developers and/or.
It only lasts for 23 years. So if we're going to get significant increment off this to pay for some of these projects, we need to get movement up front.
Good point.
And just one last, and the timing might be just the right time. Might not be, but we've seen property values, the EAVs, being driven, ratcheted down, and whether it's just blindness to reality or the new normal, whatever you may want to call it, if we are close to bottom, if not at bottom, then this TIF comes along pretty much at just the right time, because as values start to increment up, we capture those values as increment, which helps to fuel the pump to help make the overall redevelopment plan and project work. So timing is probably good. Is it the best? Your guess is as good as mine, but timing right now is probably good.
Any other questions? Comments? Well, I guess I thank you all for coming tonight, and thank you guys for coming out and answering questions for the group.
And just remind you, the public hearing is on Wednesday. Thanks.
Next Wednesday, that's correct.
At 7
At 7
here.
Get to go through it again.
Thank you.
Thank you.